Hi everyone, it's Lucy from Lucy's Morsels, and I just got back from a fairly epic trip to Scotland. One of the reasons that we went to Scotland is that my dad had always wanted to visit Shetland, and he passed away 2 years ago, and so my mom and I are still trying to find ways to make new memories with him. And so whether it's visiting places that he loved or visiting places he always wanted to go, my mom and I are kind of on a mission. And today I'm going to show you some videos and pictures and tell you all about my trip to Shetland and Orkney Islands. So Shetland and Orkney are part of Scotland and they're islands north of the mainland. It's a bit of a schlep up there, and it was really interesting to find out that actually a lot of people from Scotland had never been up there. So on our 3-week trip to Scotland, 1 week of it was spent on a bus tour wandering around Shetland and Orkney Islands, and it was amazing. So I'm really excited to share some videos, some pictures, some memories, and a lot of sheep. On the first day of our tour, we were picked up on the bus down in Edinburgh, and then we took the bus up to Aberdeen, which is on the east coast of Scotland. And from there, we got on a ferry. I like ferries. I found out I'm not that good at sleeping on them, however, because every time I woke up in the middle of the night, I felt like I was going up and down and up and down in my bed. In the morning, we arrived in Berwick, Shetland, and got on our bus. It had come on the ferry with us. How awesome is that? Got on the bus and then headed just outside of the city to what is called Ring of Brodgar. A broch is basically an intricately built stone structure, and there's actually a lot of layers, so it's a little bit of a maze to wander around to get in. Historians aren't entirely sure if it was a little bit defense, a little bit home, but it also seems like it was a little bit bragging rights, because all these lords of the land could protect their people, they could provide for their people, and they could build this really beautiful living place. And if I was going to have a favorite broch, it would be Clickaman, because right when we got off the bus, there were ponies. Then we got back on the bus and headed to the town of Scalloway, which is right on the water. And it's not a very big town. In fact, there's a not very wide road going through it, which our bus driver very gallantly took our bus up and down. It was amazing. So Scalloway Castle was actually built in 1600 for Earl Patrick Stewart. No, not the guy from Star Trek. Anyway, apparently this Earl Patrick Stewart was kind of a terrible lord and was inconsiderate of his tenants and punished them in terrible ways. So we're not a fan of him as a person. However, I'm a fan of his palaces and castles. So Shetland actually sits between the North Atlantic Ocean and the North Sea. And there's this little isthmus where you can throw a stone from the North Sea to the North Atlantic. I can't throw a stone that far. I didn't even try. It wasn't even kind of a little. But it was really fun being on an isthmus between these two big seas, and yet, you know, they seem so small and inconspicuous. There were 2 sheep. They didn't seem to think it was as cool as I was, but I assume that they're locals and they take their views for granted. So the food in Shetland was a little bit interesting. A lot of the places that we had lunch had a lot of starch-heavy and cheese-heavy options. But lunch on the first day was at the St. Magnus Hotel. And they brought out a plate of sandwiches cut in quarters, so they look like tea sandwiches, which were good and light, and then a bowl of soup, which was also delicious and really nice because it was chilly outside. And then they brought dessert. So there was one plate that had all these dessert bars and cookies and really yummy stuff. And then there was a plate of homemade scones, or scones if you're from Scotland. Anyway, I think these might have been the best scones of the entire trip. I wanted to share this lunch because for some reason it was just so much fun and so delicious. So, St. Magnus Hotel if you end up on Shetland and you need a bite to eat. If you look up images of Shetland, you'll see these beautiful cliffs and ocean waves crashing up against them. And at Hms, that was when we found it. I'll let you judge for yourself how beautiful these crashing waves were against the sea cliffs. Since coming home and doing a bit of research, I've found out that you can stay in the Hms Lighthouse. So also off the coast in this area is this rock formation called Holm, and it looks like a horse drinking out of water. You can see it in this picture, although it's not very close. It was at this moment when we were looking out at Holm that I really felt like my dad was with us, which was really fun. I've always been an ocean person, and so it makes perfect sense to me why this is where I felt him the most. But this is when I really understood why he would want to come up here and see the beautiful part of the country. After touring around Shetland for the day, we headed to our hotel for the night, which was the Boosta House Hotel. Talk about fun. Not only was it cute, the lands were beautiful, the view was beautiful, and their food was amazing. They make everything on site, and it was absolutely the best sticky toffee pudding we had on our entire trip. On day 2 on Shetland, we headed up to the Sundberg Lighthouse. Now, I like lighthouses, and I love ocean views. However, it was the puffins that stole my heart at this lighthouse. Oh, aren't they so cute? Before we left Shetland, we had an opportunity to walk around the town of Berwick. The only store that wasn't packed with tourists was the arts and crafts store, so it's kind of like a Joann's for Shetland. So my mom and I wandered in, and we found 2 ladies who wanted to hear all about us, and we heard all about them. And it was so much fun talking to locals and hearing what they loved, and they were really excited about everything that we'd been doing too. We did buy something there because, well, it was too good to pass up. Ta-da! Isn't it cute? And it's gonna keep my ears so warm. Then we boarded the ferry to head to Orkney. It was about a 5-hour trip. My mom and I grabbed seats up near the front of the boat next to the window, and I watched the sunset as we cruised along the North Sea, and I'll never forget that evening that we spent on the ferry from Shetland to Orkney. Our first stop in Orkney was the Ring of Brodgar. If it looks familiar and you're thinking, that looks like Stonehenge, you're right, it's the exact same kind of formation, except the Ring of Brodgar is older. Also, there are a lot more standing stones left. There's 36 of the original 60, and because it's not so overpopulated with tourists or visitors, you can walk up and touch the stones, which is really crazy. So this third thing, Maze Howe, when you drive along the road, just looks like a covered up mound in the dirt. But Maze Howe is actually this historic tomb. And so you take the tour from the visitor center, and you have to walk through a tunnel. So if you're claustrophobic, Maze Howe is not for you. As you get your workout walking through the tunnel, you'll come into the main part of the tomb, and it's actually quite wide open, and you can stand right up. Now, the interesting story is that while the original tomb is about 5,000 years old, the roof is much newer. So if you look up, there's actually white brick in a way that doesn't look like it's from prehistoric times in any way, shape, or form. Now, the story of Maze Howe is actually a few levels. The first is that it was originally a tomb in prehistoric times. And then a few Vikings needed some shelter, and they ended up breaking through the roof and finding this tomb where they could live. And they carved along the walls while they were in there. And so the tour guide will show you where they carved pictures and stories and told about what they were doing and who they were a little bit. Flash forward a few centuries later, and some archaeologists in the 19th century went looking for Maze Howe. They knew it had existed. So at the time, a farmer had the land. He had no idea what it was. And so the archaeologist convinced him, hey, can you let us in? We'll take our pictures, we'll get our information, and then we'll go. And he said, okay. So they broke in again through the top, and they went in, they took their information, they took some pictures, they took some drawings, and they left, with the hole still in the ground. And so the farmer had to close it up, and since it was the 19th century, he used the Victorian era style of roofing, which is these whitewashed bricks. And so it's really interesting because you see kind of 3 levels of history happening in this one same place for all these kinds of different reasons. And if you're wondering why you're just watching me and none of the video or pictures, it's because you're not allowed to take pictures in there. So you just have to take my word for it. So now one of my favorite things on our entire trip. Other people who were on our bus tour kept talking about the Italian chapel. I had no idea what they were talking about, and frankly, I kind of thought they were confused at first. So it turns out the Italian chapel is this very, very small site on Orkney with a fascinating history. During World War II, Winston Churchill decided that the water flow on this particular area of Orkney needed to be blocked off so that it wouldn't get invaded by ships. And so they used local laborers to block off scapa flow with these kind of rock barriers. And eventually there was a labor shortage in Orkney, and so they moved these prisoners of war, who were all from Italy, up to the area to work on these barricades. So that was in 1942. In 1943, Italy fell to the Allied forces, and so these Italian POWs got a bit of a status change. So they were now paid for their work, and they had a little bit more freedoms. So as part of this, these Italian POWs asked if they could build a chapel to worship in. And they were granted the permission, but they weren't given any money or materials to make it happen. And so here's where the story gets really fascinating. These men took an old barrack and turned it into the Italian chapel. And if you walk up to it from the front, it looks like this small Italian chapel in the countryside somewhere in Italy, and it's beautiful. As you walk inside, you get even more detail and you become even more fascinated with what they did. They painted sort of al frescoes to present different views depicting these wonderful things. So the detail is phenomenal. The thing that's really fascinating is that they didn't have any materials. So the wood that they used for the tabernacle was actually from a wrecked ship nearby. And then all of the metal that they used for the candle holders and things of that nature was all just scrap metal that they had on site. So it's amazing that they created this beautiful thing from whatever they had on hand. And I think it's so worth a visit. If you end up in Orkney, you cannot skip the Italian chapel. And I think you really should go out of your way to see it. So before getting on the ferry to return to Scotland mainland, we stopped at Yesnaby, which is one of those beautiful places where you can watch the ocean waves crash against those glorious cliffs. It was a final way to enjoy having my dad with us and making new memories on this trip. It was pretty beautiful. It was also windy and cold. If you're from Scotland or you live in Scotland and you haven't been up to Shetland and Orkney, I can't recommend it enough. It's beautiful and it's sort of in your backyard, even though it takes quite a bit of work to get up there. There are definitely tours, and I'll link to the one below that we used. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this travel diary. I'll see you guys later. Bye.